At the will reading, my parents left my brother $15 million and told me to make it on my own. Then, the law office on Bay Street smelled of fresh coffee and old paper, the kind of place where important things were decided. I sat at the polished mahogany table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to ignore the way the sunlight slanted through the tall windows and caught the dust motes floating above the Savannah River outside. Across from me, Liam adjusted his tie, a navy silk one he probably bought just for this. My parents, Susan and Robert, were gone, taken by a car accident on a rainy night 3 months ago, and today was the reading of their will. I was 28, a wetland ecologist with a quiet life, and I told myself I didn't expect much. But deep down, I hoped for something. A sign they'd seen me, even a little. James Callahan, the lawyer, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He was older, with a calm voice that made the room feel heavier. Liam leaned forward, his jaw tight like he was waiting for a prize. Susan and Robert had built a real estate empire in Savannah, and everyone knew the numbers would be big. Callahan began reading. To our son, Liam Harper, we leave $15 million, including $10 million in cash from our primary accounts and $5 million in properties, notably the Ardsley Park mansion valued at $2 million and additional holdings in Chatham County. The words landed like a stone in my chest. $15 million. The mansion on Abercorn Street, with its wraparound porch and jasmine vines, was where Liam hosted his investor dinners. It made sense. He was their golden child, the one who closed deals and charmed clients. But then Callahan turned to me, his voice steady. To our daughter, Emma Harper, we leave this message. Emma should make it on her own. I stared at the table, my throat tight. Make it on my own. I'd been doing that for years, paying my way through grad school with scholarships, renting a one-bedroom apartment off Victory Drive for $1,800 a month, driving a used Honda CR-V. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was numb, like I'd been erased. Liam didn't look at me. He was already texting someone, probably bragging. Susan and Robert had always praised his ambition, but I wondered if they pushed him too hard, if his confidence hid a fear of failing them. Then Callahan paused, pulling a sealed envelope from his briefcase. There's one more document, he said, from Margaret Turner regarding her late husband, Henry Turner's estate. My grandmother, Maggie. My parents' faces stiffened. Liam's phone went still. The envelope had my name on it in Maggie's sharp handwriting, and it said I needed to come to her farm on Skidaway Island. The drive to Skidaway Island took 20 minutes, but it felt longer, like the road was pulling me back to a place I wasn't sure I belonged anymore. My Honda CR-V hummed along the causeway, passing marshes where egrets stood like statues in the shallow water. Savannah's humid air clung to my skin, and I cracked the window to let in the salty breeze. I hadn't been to Grandma Maggie's farm in 3 years, not since before Grandpa Henry got sick. As a kid, I'd spent summers there, trailing Henry through the wetlands, my sneakers caked in mud, scribbling notes about marsh grasses in a little spiral notebook he gave me. I still kept that notebook in a drawer at home, its edges frayed from years of handling. The farm came into view, a weathered wooden house with a wide porch draped in clematis vines. Live oaks framed the yard, their branches heavy with Spanish moss. I parked near the old pecan tree, its gnarled roots pushing up the gravel, and hesitated before getting out. The air smelled of river mud and honeysuckle, a mix that used to mean safety. Now it felt like a memory I wasn't sure I could trust. I knocked on the screen door, my heart thumping. Maggie opened it, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes sharp as ever. "So, you finally showed up," she said, her voice like a blade. No hug, no smile, just her arms crossed over a faded plaid shirt. "Grandma, I don't understand," I said, stepping closer. "The lawyer said you had something for me." Maggie's jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something. Hurt, maybe, or confusion. "They told me you were too busy," she said. Liam said you didn't want to be bothered, that you had your own life in Atlanta. I froze. That's not true, I said, my voice catching. I called. I came by when Henry was sick. Liam told me no one was home. Maggie's eyes narrowed. We were here, Emma. Always. The words hit like a slap. I followed her inside, the living room dim with the scent of cedar and old books. A photo of Henry hung above the fireplace, his smile warm, his hands holding a pair of binoculars. Maggie handed me a worn leather notebook, its cover soft from years of use. This was his, she said. He kept asking for you every day near the end. I opened it, recognizing Henry's neat handwriting, notes on tidal flows, salinity levels, and my childhood sketches of roseate spoonbills. On the last page, he'd written, Wormslow Historic Site, Emma's Place. Grandma, I tried to be there, I said, my throat dry. I flew down for his funeral, $300 I didn't have, and when I got to the cathedral basilica, it was empty. Liam said it was at 2, but it was 11. Maggie sank into an armchair, her hands trembling. They told everyone you didn't care, she said softly. Liam gave us a number to reach you, but it wasn't yours. I checked the number in Henry's notebook, completely different from mine. I'd had the same number since college. I wanted to scream, to cry, but instead I felt a strange calm, like the truth was heavier than my anger. Liam wasn't just thoughtless. He'd built a wall between me and Henry, maybe to secure his own place, maybe because he believed I didn't belong. Maggie looked at me, her eyes softer now. Henry left something for you at Wormslow, she said, but we need everyone here to read it. I nodded, my fingers tracing Henry's words, wondering what he'd seen in me that my parents never did. Maggie's farmhouse felt smaller that afternoon, the living room crowded with the weight of what was about to happen. The cedar scent mixed with the faint smoke from the fireplace, and the old pendulum clock on the mantel ticked louder than I remembered. I sat at the oak dining table, its surface scratched from years of family dinners I'd mostly missed. Maggie stood by the window, her plaid shirt tucked neatly into jeans, staring out at the marsh as if bracing for a storm. Liam, Susan, and Robert arrived one by one, their footsteps heavy on the porch. Liam's navy tie was gone, replaced by a pressed polo shirt, but his eyes darted nervously, like he sensed a shift. Susan smoothed her linen dress, her smile tight, while Robert adjusted his glasses, avoiding my gaze. Maggie didn't offer them coffee or chairs. Sit, she said, her voice low but firm, pointing to the faded green sofa. They sat, Liam in the middle, his hands clasped too tightly. James Callahan arrived last, his leather briefcase looking out of place against the room's worn charm. He nodded at me, his face unreadable, and set a manila envelope on the table. This is Henry Turner's final will, dated 2023, he said. It includes a codicil to be read with all parties present. Susan's smile faltered. I thought this was settled, she said, her voice high, like she was trying to keep things light. Robert shifted, his fingers tapping the sofa arm. Liam leaned forward, his jaw set. What's this about, Maggie? He asked, but she didn't answer, just stared at him with eyes that could cut glass. I stayed quiet, my hands tracing the edge of Henry's notebook, still in my lap. Part of me wanted to run, to avoid whatever was coming, but another part, a stronger one, needed to know. Callahan opened the envelope and began. To my wife, Margaret Turner, I leave our Skidaway Island farm, valued at $800,000 and sufficient funds for her care. Maggie didn't blink, her face steady. To my granddaughter, Emma Harper, I leave the Wormslow Environmental Research Center, valued at $3 million, including the facility, equipment, and a $1 million operating fund. My breath caught. Wormslow. The place Henry took me as a kid, where we'd watch herons glide over the oak-lined avenue. A research center? I hadn't known. Callahan continued. To my grandson, Liam Harper, I leave $500,000 in cash and a parcel of land in Chatham County, valued at $200,000. Liam's face froze, then twisted. "What?" he said, standing so fast the sofa creaked. "That's it? A fraction of what they gave me?" Susan touched his arm, whispering something, but he shook her off. Robert stared at the floor, his glasses fogging slightly. "There's more," Callahan said, pulling out a handwritten letter. "Henry requested this be read aloud." He cleared his throat. "My dearest Emma, you were the one who asked why the marsh grasses grew taller in some places, who stayed up late sketching birds when others were asleep. I saw your light, even when your parents didn't. I'm sorry I didn't shield you from their neglect. Liam, you chased what they valued, but it wasn't your fault they couldn't see Emma's worth. I give you enough to start fresh, but Emma's heart belongs to the work I loved." The room went still, the clock's ticks deafening. Liam's face flushed, his hands clenched. "This is insane," he said. "I visited him, played the part because they told me it was my duty. You think I wanted to?" His voice cracked, and I saw it. A flicker of guilt, maybe shame, beneath his anger. Susan's eyes welled up, but she didn't speak. Robert finally looked at me, his mouth opening, then closing. I stood, my voice steadier than I felt. "You gave them a fake number, Liam. You told me the funeral was at 2, not 11. You made sure I was gone." Liam flinched, his eyes darting to Maggie. "I didn't mean—" he started, but Maggie cut him off. "Enough," she said. "You all let Emma carry the weight of your choices. Get out." Susan gasped. Robert stammered. But they left, Liam's steps heavy, like he was dragging something he couldn't name. The Wormslow Environmental Research Center didn't look like much from the outside. A low brick building tucked behind the famous oak-lined avenue, its tin roof glinting in the Savannah sun. But inside, it was alive with possibility. Glass-walled labs filled with microscopes, data tablets, and shelves of soil samples. I stood in the main room that first day, holding Henry's notebook, my fingers brushing the page where he'd written, "Emma's Place." A wooden desk held a framed photo of us from 10 years ago, me in muddy overalls, grinning beside Henry in the Wormslow marshes. I didn't cry, but my chest ached with a mix of gratitude and guilt. I'd almost believed I wasn't enough. I moved to Savannah a month later, renting a one-bedroom apartment off Habersham Street for $1,800 a month. It had creaky hardwood floors and a tiny balcony where I kept a pot of marsh grass, a nod to Henry's lessons. My salary at the center was $75,000 a year, enough to cover rent, groceries, and my student loan payments, about $500 a month from grad school. The center's $1 million operating fund felt like a lifeline, but I was careful, budgeting $50,000 a year for our first project, studying salinity changes in the Skidaway River. I hired 2 researchers, Clara and Jamal, both from the University of Georgia, and we spent long days testing water samples and arguing over data in the lab's break room, where a coffee maker hummed constantly. I started Coastal Explorers, a program for local kids, because I remembered being the quiet girl who loved science, but felt invisible. We had 20 students, mostly from Savannah's public schools, meeting twice a week to learn about marsh ecosystems. The program's budget, $50,000 from Henry's fund, covered notebooks, microscopes, and bus rentals for field trips. One girl, Mia, always wore a faded Braves cap and sketched crabs in her notebook. When I praised her drawings, she blushed, like she wasn't used to being noticed. Those moments made the long hours worth it, though I sometimes lay awake at night, wondering if I was doing enough to honor Henry. Maggie visited often, bringing pecan pies and stories about Henry's early days as a scientist. She'd sit in the lab's garden, where we'd planted native grasses, and tell me how Henry believed marshes could teach us resilience. "You're like him," she said once, her voice soft. I wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered, a shadow from years of being overlooked. 2 years later, I got an email from Liam. The subject line was simple: "Can we talk?" I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the delete button. I hadn't seen him since that day at Maggie's, his footsteps fading down the porch. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to meet at the center. He showed up in a plain t-shirt and jeans, no trace of the polished businessman. His eyes were tired, like he'd been carrying something heavy. "I was wrong," he said, staring at the garden. "I thought I had to win, to prove I was enough for them. I didn't see what it did to you." It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was honest. I didn't forgive him, not fully. Some hurts don't fade, but I let him volunteer for Coastal Explorers. He taught the kids how to present their projects, his voice patient as he coached Mia through her nerves. Watching him, I saw a man trying to rebuild, maybe not for me, but for himself. Maggie noticed it too. "He's not Henry," she said one evening, "but he's trying." That was enough for now. The center wasn't just a building. It was a place where broken things could grow again, like the marshes Henry loved. 5 years after that day at Maggie's farmhouse, I stood in a marsh on Skidaway Island, the late afternoon sun painting the water gold. The air hummed with cicadas, and a roseate spoonbill waded nearby, its pink feathers catching the light. My students from Coastal Explorers were scattered along the bank, collecting water samples in small vials, their laughter mixing with the splash of boots in mud. I held Henry's leather notebook, its pages now tucked safely in my office at the Wormslow Environmental Research Center, but I brought it out today, a quiet reminder of where this all began. The center had grown beyond what I'd imagined. Last month, we'd secured a $500,000 grant from the National Conservation Fund, enough to build a new lab for $300,000 and expand Coastal Explorers to 50 students for another $100,000 a year. I still lived in my Habersham Street apartment, paying $1,800 a month, its balcony now crowded with pots of cordgrass and a single tomato plant I was terrible at keeping alive. My salary, $75,000, covered my bills, and I'd finally paid off my student loans last year. A quiet victory I celebrated with a glass of sweet tea on Maggie's porch. Maggie lived in a small cottage near my apartment now, her farm sold to a local family who promised to keep the pecan tree. We met most mornings at a coffee shop on Broughton Street, where she'd sip black coffee and tell me stories about Henry, how he'd once spent a whole day mapping a single marsh channel, just because he was curious. "You've got his stubbornness," she said last week, her eyes crinkling. I smiled, but I still wondered if I was enough, if I'd made him proud. One of my students, Mia, ran up, her Braves cap tilted back. "Miss Emma, look," she said, holding out a sketch of the spoonbill, its beak drawn with careful detail. I knelt beside her, my heart full. "You're an artist," I told her, and she beamed like she'd never heard it before. In that moment, I saw myself at her age, shy and curious, waiting for someone to notice. Henry had. I hadn't spoken to Liam in months, but he still volunteered for Coastal Explorers twice a year, teaching kids how to speak confidently. Susan and Robert sent emails I didn't open, their names tied to a past I'd let go. Standing in the marsh, I realized Henry's legacy wasn't just the center or the money. It was the permission he gave me to ask questions, to be seen. "Ask the questions no one else does," he'd told me once. "One day they'll listen." Now they did.